So I made another tool for After Effects called Rec Control that's available on AE Scripts, link in the description. Rec Control is an extension that gives you more control over rectangle shapes in After Effects. If you do any sort of UI or SaaS animation, you have to deal with rectangles a lot, and you know the native rectangle controls in After Effects are very limited. With Rec Control, you can keyframe width, height, alignment, corner roundness, Squircle-style corners, convex or concave corner rounding, which makes it a lot easier to do animations like what you're seeing right here. And then also for UI work, what Rec Control does is it allows you to one-click create nulls that you can then use to parent elements inside or outside of your rectangle, so that you can change your rectangle's size or shape and have everything inside automatically react to it so you don't have to animate as much stuff, which is a huge help when you're doing a lot of UI animation. All right, so let's go over the basics. Rec Control right here, you get to under Windows Extensions, Rec Control. To create a new one, you just click Create New. By default, it just creates a 300 by 300 gray square. If you want to change the alignment, it's best to use the Rec Control panel itself, because here you can change the alignment without changing the shape's position. Once you have the alignment that you like, you can animate width, you can animate height. You can also keyframe change alignment, which is very helpful. So you can do something like have it start this way, move over, like this, then keyframe change your alignment to say like bottom right, and then change your width. You can also change your height. And these sort of animations where you're changing the alignment can be a real pain point, so this makes it a lot easier to do that. Okay, let's clear these out. By default, corner roundness adjusts all corners at the same time because I find that's what I do most of the time. Under advanced corners, there's curvature, which controls how the curve works. So 100 is completely convex, which is normal. If you go down to 0, it's completely straight. And then if you go to negative 100, you can then get yourself a spark. Take that back to 100. Squircle is for Apple style panels. If you bring out the Squircle, it rounds it the way that Apple does their app icons. And you can also use it, I'll show you here, if you take your curvature down to negative 100, you can also use the Squircle to make your spark a little sharper. You can also keyframe to switch between all corner rounding and individual corner rounding. And here you can do each corner radius as far as it can go. So you can create some more interesting shapes than just standard rounded rectangles. Okay, and then next, let's talk about pinning nulls. So a lot of times with UI animation, you have elements inside of your shape. And normally when you animate the shape, nothing moves along with it. With Rec Control, however, if you shift click on any of these buttons, it creates a null that dynamically adjusts with your shape. So with that, you can grab things and parent them to your different nulls. And so now that part's staying at the top left, and then you can just make them for everything that you need. And then we'll fast forward through the parenting because it's boring to watch. And now all the elements follow the box animation automatically. But you'll notice what doesn't follow the box is the gradient, right? As this goes taller, the gradient doesn't stretch with it, and as it goes smaller, the gradient doesn't shrink with it. But you can adjust that too. So if we go into our layer, and we find the gradient, and we find the start and end points, and then we find what null we want it to match with. So we want it to match with the top center null, and then we also want it to match with the bottom center null. Now I'm going to create new nulls for this because we're going to do an extra little step. So I'm going to create a null at the top and a null at the bottom. And I'm going to call this bottom one gradient end. I'll call this top one gradient start. And then I'll find the positions of these. And because these nulls are already in the world space of the shape, you can just expression click and link to the position. And now your gradient stretches with your shape as well. But let's say you don't want your gradient to match exactly where these nulls are. That's another thing I have on these nulls, is you'll see on each null, there's also a point control that this position is tied to. So if you adjust the point control, it adjusts where your null goes, which is very helpful if you have like a radial gradient, because you really want that to match the position of these nulls where they're generically started. So here, you can just adjust them to where they look better. And now the next thing to go over is parented nulls. So sometimes you might have a shape, and let's say this shape is aligned to the top, right? And you have it shrinking up. But maybe you have some other animation that you don't want to go from the top center. So if you option click, say at the center, now we have a null at the center that this rect control is parented to. And so as it shrinks up to the top, you could also, have it rotate this way. And then you can keep adding more parent pins and they will dynamically link to the right spot. So say you wanted to go here, and now let's say from here you wanted to maybe rotate down from this corner here. If I option click again, it creates a new layer, all the parenting matches, and now you can do a rotation here and have it come down. And then you can keep going. You can keep adding more parent nulls that automatically get parented, and then you can continue animating, from the different points. And then what's also good with the way that this gets parented is that let's say I'm back here and I want to change this rotation here. Maybe I just change it to here. All the other nulls that come after automatically get adjusted with it, so you're not fixing later nulls if you change earlier rotations. So if this rotation now just goes to here, your later null still automatically gets updated. So it's easier to make changes later if you don't like what you did. And a few more things to go over with the rect control extension panel. This 9-point grid also works on regular layers. So here's a shape layer, a solid, some text, a pre-comp, and an image. And if you click on them, you'll see that it also adjusts their anchor points without adjusting their position. Also, if you select a layer and you shift click, it will create a null that is then parented to that section on the layer. Not sure how you would use that, but it might be helpful to you. And then also if you option click, it creates a null the layer gets parented to, and that you can animate the same way you could with a rect control layer. And then let's go over some settings. To get to settings, you click on the hamburger and click settings. Here you can change what color your pin nulls are. By default, they're whatever your default null color is, but you can make them whatever you want. You can do the same thing with parent nulls. And you can also change the scale of your pin nulls, which is helpful because if you have a lot of pin nulls and they're large, it can be kind of distracting. So I'll take that down to 20%. And then you'll see when I pin a null, it's a lot smaller. And then the final thing is sync anchor point indicator. By default, this is on. And what that does is when you select a rect control layer, it highlights where the anchor point is on the rect control extension panel. To accomplish this, rect control once a second polls After Effects to find out if you have a rect control layer selected and what the alignment is. It's a very small price to pay, but if you're finding for any reason that things are getting slow, you can always turn it off by just going into settings and clicking it off. And then it turns off. Everything still works, it just won't show you what the alignment is. And now let's go over saving defaults and presets. So here is a shape I've made that is fairly complicated. If we look at it, there are two shape layers in it that are both referencing this rect control. The main one has a gradient stroke on it and a gradient fill that are linked to these specific null positions. And then on top of it is another stroke that has some tapering on it, and then you can see it's actually rotating around the shape. And then the layer also has an outer glow to it. So building this took some time, and if I want to make more of these, I don't want to take the time it would take to rebuild it. So if you select the layer and you click Save as Default, now when I click Create New, it creates a new version of that shape with all the expressions for the gradients linked to the new version. So you can have multiple copies of these and they won't interfere with each other. And if eventually you don't want this to be your default shape again, you can just click Reset Default. And now when you create a new one, it just goes back to a square box. Presets work in basically the same way. So if I select this layer and I click Save as Preset, it asks me to name it. I'll just call it Gradient Box. Now down here, it has Gradient Box selected instead of default. And so now if I click Create New, it makes the shape. But what's good about presets is you have them forever. So, if a month from now you need to use it again, you still have it saved, even if you've used different defaults in the meantime. Another cool thing about both default and presets is it actually saves any animation you have on your layer as well. So that example I had early on, I saved as a demo 1. And so if I create new and we solo it, it's actually now built out that entire animation that you saw. And it will also save any pinned nulls that you have on your layer as well. So demo 2, if I click create new, solo, you'll see has all of the pins of this box animation here in it. Unfortunately, it can't save elements that are parented to these nulls, and it can't save parent nulls, but this still gives you a lot to work with, and it works with your gradients. And then finally, let's talk about replacing shapes. So here I have just a regular rounded rectangle that I made in After Effects. It's got a gradient stroke and a gradient fill. And if I wanted to recreate this as a rect control layer by hand, it would take a lot of time. But if you just click this button, it does it all for you. And now you have a version of the layer as a rect control layer that's easy to animate. But you're probably thinking, hey, if I'm doing UI animation, I'm probably bringing stuff in from Figma. So here we are in Figma. I have Overlord. You can see this is also a rounded rectangle that has a gradient fill and a gradient stroke. I'm going to bring this in. It's right here. Let's solo it. I'll replace that rectangle. And there we go. It matches. So that's a huge time saver when you're trying to bring in UI designs into After Effects and animate them quickly. And yeah, that's it. That's rect control. I've been using it for a few months now. It has really sped up my workflow, and hopefully you find it useful too.